Council members, be seated.
Yeah, there comes a limit.
Gotta set your priorities, Robin.
Clear.
I don't share that with everyone. That's like a top secret transcription weapon.
See that? Robin?
Yeah, we've seen this stuff.
Oh, you got it. Okay. It came back to me then.
Stephanie wanted like 5 minutes.
Councilwoman Ivy?
She'll be here momentarily.
Oh, you're later than me.
Thank you. We're back in session now. We're moving to item 6, request for work session regarding West Side development ideas. Steve Thacker was going to talk about this.
Well, I'm introducing it, and we do have Chad Bessinger here if you have questions for him, seated in the back. Chad contacted me recently, wanted to talk about development ideas for the west side, south of the megaplex area there, between the freeway and 1250 West. The conversation evolved eventually to the point where he expressed a desire to have an opportunity to get some feedback from the council about some development ideas for that area. And when I say the area, I'm talking about a large area, potentially including Trinity Industries. Chad has been in conversation with several of the adjoining property owners in the area, including Trinity Industries. I've chatted with the city attorney, with our community development director and the mayor, getting their feedback as to whether such a conversation would be appropriate, as long as it was understood that there can be no commitments taken from the conversation. We agreed that there may be some value to that because at some point you want to restart the planning on the west side. Tonight is not the time to talk about those ideas. Tonight is simply the request from Mr. Bessinger whether you're willing to have a work session, and staff would suggest with the Planning Commission involved as well, to hear his ideas for that area. It wouldn't occur until October at the earliest because they need some time to put together their thoughts, kind of a conceptual master plan for the area, including the Trinity property, I think, Chad, is what you were saying. So that's the question before you. Are you willing to entertain a work session in October at the earliest for that kind of a conversation?
Well, let me ask a question of Lisa. How much pre-training do you want the council to have on this particular type of meeting? Since this is kind of different than what we normally do, do you feel that this instruction is enough to keep us out of potentially making any commitments, or do you think you need like a 20-minute sit down with us beforehand? I'm just a little concerned about how that would be structured and what kind of commitments we may or may not intentionally make.
Yeah, and I think in my discussions with Steve, in the past, my concern is having developers actually come and lobby the council members. I believe in the process where you provide public notice, you put it on the agenda so that other people can know that you're going to talk about something and come and listen. And also my concern with, let's just meet with a couple of you at a time in order to avoid that. But in this one, I think if you're doing it as a work session, I really don't have that concern with it because it would be noticed, it would be the entire council. But again, as Steve said, I think in the staff report he put in many disclaimers, and we could continue to do so, but that the applicant wouldn't even be an applicant. That's the other thing. We would not, that's the other distinguishing factor, is that we do not have a pending application, which is where we get into some difficulty as well, because we want to give the public as much face time as the developers. But this would just be a work session to talk about planning.
He's seeking some initial reaction to some potential ideas for the use of that area. He would also share with you his conversations with Trinity Industries and what he's learned from them about their property.
But again, I don't think that the council is obligated to do so. If you would rather see an application with facts, with details, you know, and that, because if you don't have an application before you, it's just theoretical. But, so it's totally up to the council, and I think that's why, you know, we're asking you if you'd like to have this or not.
And if a work session was done, that would obviously be a public meeting as well too, right?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. It would be noticed, it would be a public meeting, but we could also have a brief introduction from staff or the attorney saying this is just discussion, and the applicant really can't put anything. And they have to understand.
But they're not an
whether-
applicant, they're just a
Or,
concern.
yes,
Yeah,
the-
see, this is part of, I want to
Yeah.
make sure that we stay above board on the whole thing,
Right,
so.
and because they're really, I don't know the value, because it's just gonna be individual thoughts of, you know, and then you kind of have to decide what you're gonna take from that. But it's very different talking conceptually or speculating versus responding to an application that's before you.
In my opinion, it is more helpful to do this kind of step at this point in the process rather than wait for an actual application, because we don't have a West Side plan in place. And so if we waited for an actual application, then all of a sudden we're putting a West Side plan in place reactively. Whereas we have already said we want to work on a West Side plan, we get someone to do the work of an economic development director for us, bring us some information about what kind of information is out there, what kind of possibilities are out there, with the understanding that we intend to go through a more complete process that isn't simply reactive and more proactive, with that information being, you know, at least some of the, you know, some information from some stakeholders.
So my concern that I have is really in the structure of the two public bodies that would be involved in the work session. And it looks, my concern really is they are separate in their function, although they have the same general goal. I'm just, maybe the structure of the meeting would be different potentially, because if they're looking for a hot or cold, then that's a legislative decision to say hot or cold, and then a planning decision to implement as they get closer to something that is reasonable. So I don't know. I just look at them as two separate bodies. I don't see them necessarily. I'm not saying the planning commission can't come. It's a public meeting, but I would be concerned about commingling those two. And this is where, at least I'm just having a lot of legislative / legal heartburn of how I help the developer understand what the temperature is from the city with no obligation, and not commingling the two bodies because they have different functions.
No, I think that's a good point.
I think it's a really good, oh,
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I agree. And the same implementation, yeah, because the planning commission would be applying and making recommendations, so.
I agree that it's a good point, and my response to that is that I wouldn't intend to indicate a hot or a cold. I would intend to only at that time hear what the possibilities are, and then state that we plan on going through a process, and now we have that information to have in our heads as part of that process.
Sure, and I don't want to.
think that's what the developer is looking for
Right,
at all.
so then if we
why,
can make.
why would he want to give us the time of day and his efforts to put something together if we're not going to give him even a
Because his
general hot or
information
cold?
might be able to influence the process and the end result of that, and that would be the indication of hot or cold at the end of that process.
I think the developer, along with their city, what are you? I forgot your title.
That guy in the shirt.
Community development.
Community developer.
I don't want to miss.
I think along with their city planner, that they can give us an idea of what the land is zoned for, what it, the condition of it, that type of thing. I mean, that's the value I see in it.
Well, I don't want to misrepresent my conversation with Chad. I think Chad is hoping, and you might want to have him come up and express this himself. I think he's looking for an opportunity to put some ideas out there and get some initial reaction to those ideas before he invests in.
Well, and I'm with you, Steve. I agree with that. I mean, it's just like, I don't know that Bruce is about to include that last comment to the Christmas party slides, but I can tell by looking at him that he is going to. So I think it's fair enough. Sorry, Bruce, I put you on. I think it's fair enough if a developer is looking at this level of planning, wants to get an initial read from, as far as without making a huge, they're already making an investment. So I think it's appropriate for us to look at this in very general terms and give them some sort of non-binding feedback.
Mr. Bessinger, you've taken your time to be here, and I appreciate people's time, so just take a couple minutes.
I'm Chad Bessinger with JF Capital. We're not here to ask for your temperature, or I think it's more or less we're here to just kind of throw out some ideas. We're already vested. We own that office building right there in Legacy Crossing. We own vacant parcels of land, so we're there. We're not going anywhere. And we've been talking to Trinity Industries. They have 25 acres. We're talking like 40 acres total that's right there on the west side. And so I think our idea is to, and we're part of that 40 acres, our idea is to just kind of present some options that we feel like the property can do per kind of the restrictions that the property has between the freeways, or between the highway, the freeway, the environmental issues that Cyril Steel might have on their property. And so we'd kind of just want to throw out some ideas so that you guys can start thinking about it. I'm not coming here saying that we have under contract Trinity Industries or the property owners in between us, because we don't. Are we talking to most of them? Yes. And is Trinity Industries, are we having, good dialogue about something to do down the future? We are. And so I think we possibly could be that group that's going to come in and say, hey, not only do we own JF Capital property, but we own Trinity Industry property. So what do we want to do with it? And so I think this is just, it's something that we're going to throw out some ideas, get you guys thinking about it. So a year from now, we're not coming as an applicant, and we're laser focused on one plan. So that's kind of it. That's why we requested the work session. Whether you have planning commission here or not, it doesn't matter to us. We thought we'd just throw some ideas out, have a general discussion about it, and then kind of just go from there.
Thank
It's
you.
a public meeting, anybody can come, but I think it's a city council work session.
I
sounds
agree. I
good.
think it's a city council work session. I think it's easier with a smaller group, and we're probably not going to mislead him as much
Or confuse him.
or confuse him as much as if there's all of us here trying to,
You're going to get enough opinions out of just this group.
out of just 5 of us.
I noticed that from before.
Yeah, you've been here most of the evening, so.
That's all right.
And I'll just state that I disagree. I think it would be very valuable to have the planning commission there. I think it sounds like we'll mostly be listening, and I think the more feedback we give, the more inappropriate it is. And I'd like everyone that would be involved in that more thorough process that we would be committed to, that more proactive process, to be able to hear those ideas.
And I think legally, correct me if I'm wrong, Lisa, that if we're okay legally, I mean, anything's going to go through eventually the planning commission and city council anyway. So, if we're trying to educate the public and educate
But
our-
the planning
our committees
commission
and
could
everything
love
else.
something that the council won't consider.
Right, but that's
So-
not our intent of
But we're
this
not
night.
discussing or
is
voting.
Right, but I'm just saying, I just think, it just seems to me like when we have everybody there, we don't accomplish anything.
So-
I mean, I wouldn't, in my opinion, I wouldn't be afraid of open dialogue. I don't think is it a problem for planning commission and city council members to give open dialogue, or to have open dialogue about 40 acres of future development within their
I
city?
don't think so.
Without tying them to some sort of commitment? I don't.
Right, and that's what we're trying to set it up as
So I wouldn't
that.
be
But
afraid-
there are a
I
lot
wouldn't
of
be afraid of saying it.
expectations. I mean, we've had situations where we talk with developers and then they present something and say, well, this was exactly what you said you wanted. And so it's this expectation that these kind of meetings have. But as long as we make it very clear that this is just a discussion. I mean, obviously, you could have, you know, the
And
purpose would be to have
Well,
some dialogue.
I don't want to cut the planning commission out, but as much as they are two separate bodies, and I'm going to make an ask of you, would you give the same presentation to both bodies if we asked? So the city council and the planning commission as separate bodies?
Yeah, my comment is this is no different than somebody that sits outside of your city that want to annex into the city. And they'll come in and show you what their reasonings, what their market pattern is, and why they want to annex into the city. You haven't made any commitment that you'll even annex. You haven't made any commitment you'll rezone. My concern is twofold. It's better that you do the public's business in its entirety, and that everybody that's doing the public's business starts from the same information. So whether you want to split the planning commission and do two different presentations, or whether you want to be efficient together, you know, I don't think you're trying to accomplish anything at the meeting. You know, the issue is that both of you have set a goal for the west side. Both of you need the information to know what is out there, what's marketable, what's going on. And if the market comes in, and I'm just going to throw it out, wants 22 units an acre, you don't even have to give the temperature of that. You just now know where the market is and what's going to be driving it. And then talking after tonight, 22 units an acre is not going to be flying in the planning process. It's going to weed itself out probably pretty quickly but I think you do need everybody involved getting the same information. And this is to understand, I mean, this is different than an application or somebody coming in, I'm pre-preparing an application. This is sitting back on that 30,000 foot scale. And if you don't know what your property and market is, where are you going to get it from? Because I can't even give you all of that. And this is an opportunity for somebody to come in and say, we know the market area, we know the various ideas that fly around, we want you to understand that information so that when you undertake your West Side revamp, you can now have a better conversation with each other. If you leave the Planning Commission out, they're not going to understand what your direction is unless you prepare a memo. We want you to give this direction, and here's all our findings why we're giving you this direction.
But here's the dilemma, we're not preparing a direction for them.
That's why I'm saying the Planning Commission participating in this is more efficient all at once to understand what everybody has asked the questions. You're not giving the temperature. Yeah, we'll go for that. You're understanding their different proposals, their different ideas, what the force is driving that, what the constraints are driving at that, and everybody's getting that information. And they're getting it at the same time, in the same information, at the same meeting with the public already noticed and told that this is a conversation. So I would be in the position that if you don't want the Planning Commission there for whatever driving reason is, they need to have a separate. But the issue will be, how are they going to hear the conversations the same?
And we can't shy away from information. We just had a discussion here tonight where you delayed something so the public can get more information. So why should we not get information? You know, we don't have an economic development director. I'm sitting here as mayor trying to act as a quasi-economic development director, and you get information. I mean, that's how things work. You know, as long as it's legal, information is good. We need the information.
Well, I don't think there's any desire not to have the information. What I'm looking at is I want to keep the purity of the two bodies. The reason why is because if this is just a one-way information flow, send me a video, I'll watch it. But I'm assuming you want some interactivity and some questions back and forth. What we have noticed is when the two bodies are together, people like me who own the microphone and won't give it up, makes it harder for the other group to have their say and their questions answered directly. So I just look at it as just if you're willing, it's a divide and conquer so that everyone has equal airtime. Because the Planning Commission does have a different perspective by design. So I'm not saying cut them out. I'm saying just have them as two separate meetings so that we get more feedback. Because to me, the purpose in having a Planning Commission as a separate body is I get a different viewpoint. When the two bodies are together, it's what does the council want? That's not necessarily the best.
I think that's trying to parse it too much at this level. You're trying to parse it into a decision-making process. I don't think you should be doing that. I think you talk about the markets, you talk about the constraints, people share that information. There's no agenda going on. And the city council, if the Planning Commission is not part of that larger process, they can't be your citizen planners. You're handcuffing them. And this is the point the commission makes over and over and over to you. You're not sending us clear messages. You're not working and saying where the direction you're going. You're taking the information and you say, thanks, Planning Commission, go create a West Side plan. And they're sitting there going, I don't even know which way the wind I should be facing right now. If they have the information and you have the discussion, you're not making decisions. You're sharing a debate and saying, hey, what is that brownfield site? What does that mean? So that you can understand what it means, and so the Planning Commission can understand what it means. And they get that same information. And it's on record, it's there available, the body's met, you're in the public forum, and it's no different than somebody coming into the city and saying, I want to annex. And you've got to decide, well, what kind of zoning? So what you do is you say, okay, here's the market forces and here's the constraints of the property. Now there's two ways of approaching it after that. You submit an application and we'll to amend our general plan, and we'll go through the vetting process the way you're wanting to guide it. Or we've talked about it, we understand the market forces, and this is the direction. And we'll drive the ultimate vision on the property, and you'll participate as a stakeholder. Two bodies should be meeting together and having that conversation.
My question is that what he wants? Because to me, he's wanting the temperature. The Planning Commission can't give him anything. I mean, they can't approve.
You can't give him any.
They can't approve any. I can't give him anything in that meeting, but I think he's wanting to know, what.
No,
What do you want to know? Because there's obviously an objective.
Well,
Nobody meets for no
whether-
purpose.
Yeah, whether it's it's two separate meetings or the same combined meeting, it doesn't matter to us. But I would be disappointed if we kind of gave a presentation and you guys all sat there with poker faces and not like happy or sad or showing that. I would hope that it would be some sort of open dialogue. This is 40 acres in Centerville City that is under your control to help plan. And so let's go do it together. Let's look at it as a partnership. We own some of the property. Hopefully we own more of it. And, let's go create something that everybody can be happy about for the next 50 to 100 years. But yeah, I guess we would want some questions. We would want some feedback, whether you call it temperature or not. I don't think you should be afraid to give it. Under the direction where it says that this is just a discussion, I'm sure we can throw out all the disclaimers before the meeting, and it's open to the public. Anybody that wants to be there is going to be there. But yeah, I'd be disappointed if nobody gave any feedback, and when we were done, you guys just sat there.
I mean, you'll talk about those kind of things in the generality terms. If they came in here and said, we need to support Hill Air Force Base, and here's the bomb-making plant, and we think this would work because we've got a rail spur there. There's nothing wrong with you saying that. It is just an intensity that we don't even think we'd begin to deal with. But if it came to you and said, here's the commercial viability, here's the front runner viability, here's the residential viability, and you could at least say, commercial is interesting to us, and that's something that we would probably consider on our plate. If that didn't work, then we might look at something else. But you're not committing to any direction because it's industrial very high. That's where you're at. You've got to start somewhere. He's just playing the economic development hat for you. If you had an economic development director, they would be having this conversation with both bodies on a weekly basis, if not monthly basis. Here's the market forces. This is where we could go. We've got a bid out here. We see at the state that wants Facebook to come into here. Are you interested in bidding on Facebook and giving incentives?
I guess what I don't want is for the Planning Commission to give him one idea and the City Council to give him another. And so if we have this meeting...
That's a perfect answer. That's a perfect answer for a developer to hear. Because then they know people have different thoughts.
Well, I'd like to point out that although we're elected and the Planning Commission are not elected, we're all citizens of Centerville. And we have had work sessions with the Planning Commission, and we've all said we should do this more often. This helps us come to a better understanding of the two bodies and where we're coming from. And I like the idea of us meeting together for a couple reasons. Number one, if it's on the public record and if there's an interested citizen, they come to one meeting and they hear all the different questions and perspectives and part of the discussion. They don't have to come to 2 separate meetings. Number 2, we will all be enriched by hearing all of those different, even conflicting feedbacks and questions. I mean, the more people that are there, the more different questions get thought of to get asked, the more different opinions that get thrown out there, and all of those opinions are valid. And so I personally strongly prefer the idea of us.
Yeah, because to my view is if Facebook was looking, we did this for the planning exercise at UT. Facebook is opening up. They need this, and this, and this to go. I would come to both of your bodies as your economic development director, and we'd have a meeting. We'd talk about the planning principles of whether we want to entertain Facebook. And we'd talk about whether we go out with an RDA. We would go through the process with the RDA, the city council, and the planning commission to put a bid in for Facebook. If I was your economic development director, because that's what economic development directors are going to do. You're just not familiar with that. And so you are in an uncomfortable place in that kind of specific discussion. But you would actually be giving some temperature of whether we should be moving towards entertaining a Facebook project here.
Well, this keeps getting cast, it seems to me this keeps getting cast like we don't want the planning commission to meet in a public forum on this issue. I do. I'm looking at this as a unique situation. And what I have noticed when the 2 bodies are together is that the dialogue and discourse is different than when they're apart. And I think in some of those cases, the dialogue is stilted, whereas...
But my experience is it tilted because they don't know your direction, so they're assuming some of their own direction and chasing it, because you're not unified.
Okay, that's a fair analysis.
So if you have a discussion where you can start out in a square place with each other, then you can build the direction and the relationship to go forward on it. Because right now, your issue of housing is a disparity between the commission and yourselves. And so they have no problem, as long as that disparity exists there, and they don't fully appreciate and understand your perspective, which they don't, then they're going to go in and make those whimsical statements that I got calls about during an application saying, maybe we need more density, because they're not really partnering with you. And that's my concern with this planning commission is they want to partner, they have some strong wills, they have some advocacy, but you're leaving there unfettered to dwell in their environment and come up with what they want. And I'd rather see you 2 finally start creating a partnership.
The big advantage I see is I think back to tonight. If the planning commission and the city council had gotten together on Pages Lane and let the public all be there and hear about it, then all of a sudden we don't have all these people showing up tonight that could have been here with the planning commission that voted on the same thing a week or 2 ago. Okay, I mean, I like the idea of what Tammy says of getting together the public in one place rather than making them go all over the place and at all different meetings to find out this information. I mean, we're trying to get information to the people. We're not trying to hide it from them. We want to get the information to the people.
But we have some legal benchmarks that require that separation.
But our attorney's saying it's fine.
I'm saying, we're talking philosophical. I'm saying I don't think it is. And
okay,
I'm
let's go
entitled
get
to
a
that.
second opinion then.
I don't think we need one.
Okay?
I think what I'm saying is that
I trust the
philosophically-
attorney's opinion. I mean, that's what they're trained to do.
Did you give a final legal read on this? This is your legal read. What is your legal read?
Well, in my opinion, it would be legal for the planning commission and the city council to have a work session to talk about some potential planning. Yes. But I do agree that, I mean, I can see some of the council members' points about the 2 different bodies, but I think that that's a political or some other issue. It's not a legal issue in my mind. You could meet together if you want.
Mayor, from my perspective is really that I think that if they're willing, which I think is great, and I appreciate the fact that you're willing to talk to both bodies, I think it would be advisable to do that, just so we get that difference of opinion out there and that we don't monopolize it one body or the other. And since this is so preliminary, this sounds like an information feed. We talked about temperature, and I don't want to box you into that, but I wouldn't be in his shoes meeting if I didn't at least get to read some body language. And I think it would be fair to try and make that as small groups as possible if this turns into anything, if there's anything that, I mean, this is literally casting into the water. If there is even a twitch on that line, then it seems to me that that's the when we need to get closer to that. But this is so informational at this point. I'm not sure that they're going to get the same read. But you know, I've made my opinion very clear. I mean, what I want to do, Mayor, is I will just make a motion. We'll see what happens if somebody supports it. Great. If they vote on it, great. I would motion that we hold these meetings in October, but they are two separate meetings in the initial format, one for the Planning Commission, one for the City Council. They're both noticed as public meetings.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, let's do a roll call vote. Councilman,
Or are we going to talk about?
Well, yeah.
excuse me, further discussion on it? I'm sorry, Councilman Woman Ivy.
That's okay. I can see George's point, and I can see Corey's. And I lean toward George's, and it's for two reasons. One, that I've sat in work meetings with the Planning Commission and heard someone say, "You're the councilwoman, you tell us, and I'll just sit and wait. And I'm not going to say anything because I don't yet know what you think." And I don't want them to feel like they can't react as freely as I can, because we are two different bodies and we do have some different opinions. My other reason, though, is totally different, and that is our poor planning commissioners that we've appointed to come, and they signed up for an agreement of a couple of Wednesdays a month, and then we start piling meetings on them. And I know how I felt when I got on the city council and suddenly they started saying, "And now you'll go to all the mandatory Utopia meetings," when it was the Utopia big mess. That's when I got on. And I had meetings several times a week. That was not what I signed up for when I started out. And I don't want to burn out our planning commission saying, "Come on an additional night other than what you already agreed to." I feel like that's unfair of us.
Any further discussion on it? So, motion and a second. We're ready to vote on it? Okay, Councilman Nance?
Aye.
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 Thank
We look
you.
forward to your presentation. I'm really excited to hear this.
Thanks for hanging around, Chad.
Thanks, Chad. And Councilman McMewen, I just want to get the information to the people, so that's great. I'd prefer to do it in one body, but that's great if we do it in two bodies, just so.
Yeah, well, and that's, I don't ever want to see anything we do cast as we're trying to prohibit dialogue, and that's why I'm looking at it really. I want the planning commission to be free to say, yeah, I think he's an idiot, this is what I want to do, without having me sitting in the room.
Right.
No, I just think it's fair to give them, I think you said it well, Stephanie, just give them free rein to say what they need to say.
I think Stephanie's, I agree with what Stephanie said, because I know the one meeting we met with them, they were just dead quiet, and I just kept thinking, oh, and then they said, well, we felt like, so I feel like we dominate that, and then he doesn't know how they feel.
Let's skip to item 8, since we've had our Parks and Rec chairs here a long time. This is direction regarding selection of landscape architect for Island View Park renovation project. So, Steve, were you going to introduce that, or we want to call Lynn Keddington up? Or?
Well, let me frame it up, and then we can have Bruce and Lynn participate here. We have to select an architect, landscape architect, to lead the design team for the Island View Park renovation Phase 1. From our conversation with Dan Sontag last week on the tour of the Bountiful Park, he gave the opinion that you need to allow about 3 months for the design phase and 6 months or so for the construction. And so as I'm thinking about it, if we assume October, November, December, if we had a contract in place in time to allow the design to go forward October, November, December, I see that January you'd be releasing a bid, February you'd be receiving the bids, March you'd be awarding the contract by March, and assuming April, May, June, July, August, September as the 6 months of construction. I mean, that kind of makes sense with the construction season. but it does mean that we need to move forward fairly expeditiously with engaging the landscape architect. We have also learned, as I think I've mentioned before to you, that according, and Bruce can address this. Bruce, why don't you come up? Address the issue, Bruce, of how we, what option we have in selecting the landscape architect, the designer, under the federal law and the state, as the state officials have explained it to us.
Right. So the State Department of Construction Management, they have on the state website of purchasing website, they have state contracts, all of different companies and things where you can purchase things on state contract. That they submit bids, and they have a state department that reviews all those. They've done the same thing with architectural firms and engineering firms, and they have gone through a pre-qualification process, and that they know that these firms are qualified. These firms have can offer quality work to you, and so they've put together this list and said all of the cities, municipalities are welcome to use firms from this pre-qualified list that's already been through this process, and you can just select one and use it, so long as your engineering costs or your landscape architectural costs are under $100,000 for your project. Projects larger than that, then that doesn't work for this. But you can just pick one and use one, and it meets all of the federal standards of having been through a selection process, a qualified firm, and that sort of thing. Also, you have the option of taking a couple of firms off of that list and comparing them with each other and doing a selection between a few, if you'd like to do that too. I also contacted the Department of Parks and Recreation, from which they manage the grant, the Land Water Conservation Fund grant that we've received. Asked them, okay, how do you feel about this? Does this meet all of the qualifications for the grant, federal grant? And they said, yes, absolutely. This is what we recommend, so you don't waste a lot of your time and resources on your selection process. And so that's where we're at. Fortunately, the firm that we had already selected in our non, Tammy had helped us research out, find out some other different firms and things, and we'd gotten MGB plus A to do our conceptual plan for us so that we could apply for a grant. They're on the list. They're one of the preferred firms, and it would save some time and effort also in being able to use that same firm in going forward, versus having a new firm come in and have to take the groundwork that's already been laid by MGB plus A with conceptual plan and have to go from there. So our recommendation is that we go with MGB plus A and have them do our final plans.
Assuming we negotiate fees that are reasonable.
Right. And we also, the state also provided us with guidelines for that also, and how to negotiate those. We also were able to work with Bountiful Cities manager who gave us their contract. They had just recently worked with the same firm, and how they negotiated their fees for the Creekside Park, which we did the field trip on.
Yeah, I'd scan through that contract. I think there were some differences, and I need to understand them. I don't think we necessarily, that it's exactly the same arrangement, but.
Right.
But
ours is much smaller.
Could you just go back one section? So you'd mentioned about the watermark of 100,000 for the selection criteria. Is that the total value of the engineered landscape contract, or is that the total value of the project? Because that's a part of my understanding.
No, just the landscape architectural fee, their fee, their portion of the.
So as long as that fee is below 100,000, you don't need to go through a procurement process.
Right. Yes, because obviously our project's much more than that. Total project cost.
But it's distinctly the line item landscaped architect, as long as that's less than 100,000.
Right.
Well, that's
the part I'm trying to understand.
Well, I think that raises the other condition if we choose to go this route, which I also support the recommendation, but I think it's conditioned upon a couple of things. First of all, we will get a clear understanding from the state officials as to what is subject to that $100,000, because I want to make sure that if it's the design and the construction management or administration and so forth, we just want to be sure, get absolutely confident that we're going to not be in trouble with the feds if we go this route.
That's my concern. How soon will we have that information?
Well,
I'm a big believer in black letter law. I'd like to be able to read that. So if we were to table this tonight, how long would you need to get us that information so that we can make sure we're hitting the watermarks?
Well, I think by the next meeting, we would be able to pin down with confidence that going this route will satisfy the federal requirements, and what kind of even what kind of reasonable fee that would mean. We can bring that to you next time. But I guess the basic question, though, is, I mean, what you need to tell us tonight, though, is if you aren't comfortable going down that road with MGB plus A, then
I'm
we
not
need
comfortable.
to. Then we need to.
I'm not.
You need to
comfortable.
describe a process for us because that's going to take some time.
So the state procurement activities that they're talking about related to this money, if it were over 100,000, is that a defined process? They tell you how you have to make your selection, or is it still subject to like a city process?
You can define your own process as a city.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I've invited our Parks Committee Chair here to express his opinion on the matter if he'd like to. Len, do you want to speak to this?
We want to hear it.
We're all for information tonight.
Part of our, I've discussed this with the majority of the members of the committee, and our recommendation is that we continue with Dan, simply from a practical matter, in that Dan has already attended all of the pre-planning meetings. He's already attended all the city council meetings. He's already attended the focus group meetings. He has gone through the initial phase process, so he understands what the citizen input is, what the city council input is, and what the input is from the staff and from the committee. And we don't want to start all over again. You've already gone through a vetting process of some sort. I don't know exactly what that was, when you chose Dan and gave him the original contract. My understanding is that
I don't think we did.
No.
That never happened to us.
you've never done any vetting, or the council
I have never done any vetting.
has never decided why did we use Dan in the first place?
No, I have not.
I told you at the last meeting that I would send that, and I apologize that I didn't. It's all the way back from 2015, and I just sent it now so the council can look over it. It's just in essence, an unofficial RFP process that I went through in trying to find a landscape architect for a different couple of projects, the 1250 West corner that some of has been completed and some of has not, and some possible frontage improvements to spend some grant money that we received in the bus stop area of then Founders Park. And so that city council did go through that process of looking over that information and deciding to work with Dan. And then the experience that we've had with Dan has been very positive, very full of flexibility and affordability. And so we've continued to use him. Again, I don't disagree at all ever with the idea of going through a thorough process of compare contrast when you're hiring someone. But in this situation, I do feel like it's not going to change the end results of information that we have and that we know about, and the referrals that, the work that's been done, the quality of work that's been done, the referrals that we would get recommending this contractor who's already on the list, and it might put us past the spring planting season on a project, and just and help us miss windows of time and opportunity we could end up going through the process and coming to the same result, which wouldn't surprise me at all, or we go through the process and come to a different result, work with someone that we haven't worked with before, who knows if we're happy. There's just a lot of reasons, in my opinion, that we move forward in this way.
It's also been my experience that when you change contractors or designers midstream, it both costs you money and time. I think that in this case, I don't know. I mean, I'm all in favor. I was the maintenance manager at the refinery for a number of years, and we went through hundreds of different contracts and negotiated them. And we came to the conclusion that you find a contractor that you're happy with and that you know that his fees are reasonable and that he understands the concepts and he understands how you want your work done, and it saves both your staff and tons of time. And the result is that you end up with a better product because you're working with somebody who understands the whole process and what it is their expectations are, and you're not starting from scratch every year with a different contractor. I think you do. I think that at some point you have to say, are we getting value for our dollar? Okay? I believe, it's just my belief, that this is a competitive market. And I don't think that you're going to get a substantial difference in, I think the only difference that you're going to see is that he's going to have to sit in on meetings that Dan has already sat in on in order to get the same feel that he has, which is going to drive his cost. You're going to pay for that cost all over again if by using a different contractor. For what it's worth.
I'll agree with that. My only concern is $100,000 to me is a lot of money. My son just had a roof redone, and his neighbor had 9 bids. So he said, Mom, I'm just going with the guy that did his because he was the lowest out of 9. And he was lower than I thought he would be. And me being me, I sent somebody else over there, and they came in $5,000 less. Now, money doesn't always mean everything. I think Dan does a great job. I think he's a Centerville resident. But I think we get more competitive pricing if Dan has to come in against other people. And so that's my concern is, I mean, are we talking $10,000, $20,000? My concern is, you know, I'm great with Dan if he ends up with the contract. I just don't know why.
It's also been my experience that low bid isn't always the best bid.
And
because low bid means that he either left something out, he is going to come back for extras because he said, oh, I didn't put flashing in there. Did you need flashing on your roof? That has been my experience with, so we didn't necessarily always take the low bid because we took the bid somewhat based on, do we think that the people that are doing this job can do it for the price that they have bid it?
Well, we're not going on bids. We're not going on dollars. We're selecting a landscape architect. After we select one that we're confident will do what we want them to do and how we want to, then we start negotiating fees and prices. We're not going to be getting fees and prices from other companies either. We would just be asking for qualifications and can they do what we want them to do, and then we compare them against the qualifications of MGB. Am I correct, Steve? Yeah, we're not getting prices in and who has the low bid and who has the high bid and who's at the middle. We're not getting any of that. We're just selecting a firm that we're comfortable has the qualifications, the ability to do the job. Then we start talking money. Then we start, okay, let's negotiate a percentage of this project with you and start working that way.
And my intent in that regard is to visit again with the state
Yeah.
construction management folks, help them understand the nature of our project and apply the guidelines that the state uses to determine percentages, which are based on.
If you're not comfortable with the prices, with the negotiations, you then go back and find another company that is qualified, and you start negotiating prices with them. But it's not a it's not a who will bid on this project yet. We will go through that with contractors, with who's going to be doing the pavilion, who's going to be doing the playground, who's going to do the parking lot. We will get competitive bids from different contractors and things like that, and talking prices and things that make the project have variabilities. But you're finding a qualified landscape architect to do your plan, your design for you, and then to manage all these contractors and things.
So why do we do it for everything else except that? I mean, I'm just losing it somewhere.
Well, as a matter of fact, we don't do it for everything else. We have a city engineer that's been on board for years that we use on an hourly basis.
Well, for me, Steve, and this is the issue, it's not price. It's appearance of fairness and the utilization of taxpayer funds. I'm just going to play landscape architect for a second. I can't get into Centerville because there's been an unofficial RFP process and we've already done a selection. Where's the fairness in that? And I have an issue when it comes to using public funds where we have, and this is a disconnect, I understand, between like state procurement and city procurement, is the issue of fairness, qualified bidders, and fair ability to bid. That to me is the essence of any use of taxpayer funds, is that that criteria applies. In the city it doesn't, and I have a fundamental disconnect with that.
Well, and because we're a small city and we contract out our engineering and we don't have our own staff landscape architect, the state provides a way for cities like us to save money and not have to have those in-house professionals and have to go through that process, spending all that money, in that they do it for us. The state does a contract system that saves us from having to do all of that bidding process. If I had to bid every single thing that I spend every day, you would never get anything done in your parks department. You wouldn't get your lawns mowed. You wouldn't have lawnmowers because I'd be so busy trying to bid out and meet with bidders and things, trying to find out, okay, where can I save the dollar on this string that I'm going to put in this string trimmer? But fortunately, the state has already done that bidding process, and they have a state contract. I can go to the state contract, and if it looks like a fair price, sometimes it's not always. Sometimes I'll say, hey, you know what, I can get better than the state contract price through another vendor, and there's some of that too, but it helps save you a ton of time to take advantage of all that taxpayer dollars that you've already spent to have those state officials go through that process, select these firms, and had MGB plus A not been on that list, we wouldn't even have this option. It's because of that work that's been done, that money has been spent through those professionals, through that bidding process to even have that list for us to be able to say, okay, on our smaller projects, a smaller city can select one of these qualified companies and not have to spend all of their time and effort on this because we already have.
Right, and I'm a believer in the state contract procurement system. It's used in a number of places. And I've seen the same situation with the mosquito abatement district. Well, they'll get state contract price, and then Gary Hatch will turn around and say, I can beat that on the open market, and he does, which is great, and I appreciate the fact that he does that for the mosquito abatement district. I'm sure you do the same thing as well. I guess the issue for me is the items that are still outstanding. You think you can have that to us with the black letter read on what our restrictions are within the next 2 weeks?
Clarify what is your
So I'm looking for the state guidelines for the utilization, what is covered under the procurement amount, so that we understand that if we are awarding a contract, it meets the state procurement rules for use of the state contract, construction cost, design cost, what is that roll-up number, so that I feel like I'm going to the airport without my passport and a ticket, and I've agreed to a flight, but I don't have the details on how I'm going to get there. And that's my concern right now. I want to have the details so I can say, yep, I'm behind that.
Okay, so that makes sense, and that helps me feel better about what you're saying and what your concern is. And so let me ask you a question in response to see if I do understand. Are you saying that would you feel comfortable if we, simply knowing that we're directing staff to select and then start the negotiation process and then come back as quickly as possible, hopefully even within the 2 weeks, to say, now because we've negotiated, here are the numbers?
So in fairness to the question, my process is going to be like this. I'm going to get that information back. I'm going to look at it. I'm going to evaluate it for fairness and say, okay, we're meeting state procurement rules. We are not. I don't think a landscape company is going to come out or a design architect and challenge the city's decision, but I'd like to be defensible not only to the residents in town, but to anyone who says, hey, we didn't think Centerville was fair. If it's a defensible position, great. If it's not, then I'll be back here in 2 weeks going, I don't think we're in a defensible position. How do we improve that?
Yeah.
It's just risk aversion. I don't like being challenged when we use taxpayer funds. And maybe this is not an issue and I'm making more of it than it should be, but to me, I really want this to be considered fair. I mean, it just, the optics on it are weird when we're talking about that there's no selection process. They live in Centerville. They've worked on everything before. It just feels weird. And so I would like it to be defensible.
I respect that a ton, and so I absolutely come from that same position. And so I will point out that that is actually why in 2015 I went above and beyond with my own time to do that more thorough process. And I'm not saying you have to rely on me doing that process, but I'm just telling you I agree 100% with everything you just stated. But so what I see now is that if we go ahead and just allow staff, the motion I'd like to make for tonight is to allow staff to say, we select you, we will negotiate, and then our hands are not tied at all, then we come back with that more thorough information so that we can make a more legitimate, informed decision at that point. And it might be to move on and do something different, or it might be to say, now I feel comfortable with this. I think that that's the most efficient way for us to move forward. Efficient and very legitimate and defensible way for us to move forward at this point. I really loved your point and reminder that a lot of these services, the reason that we don't have to RFP for these kind of services is that a lot of these kinds of things are often in-house staffed in bigger cities, and so that's, you know, all the work that Lisa does, we don't RFP that, right? All the work that Randy Randall does, we don't RFP that. We have in-house services for that, and so this allows us to just work more efficiently, which again is spending tax dollars in the most efficient way possible, is to keep things moving along as efficiently as possible.
I agree with the efficiency. I'm not comfortable with the product, and I'm going to say that and just put it out there. I've been frustrated with this part from the get-go. I've expressed concerns that have been not listened to by him and not resolved to my satisfaction. And when I was concerned about it, I was told, don't worry about it, Councilwoman Ivy. We're just going to go ahead with the grant. If we get the grant, you can always say no. And then I was told, no, you can't say no. Now you're going to do what we've already decided. I'm getting really frustrated, so I'm going to put it out there. I went on that tour. I'm not impressed. I've got a lot of issues. I'm not impressed. I don't think I want to go with this company. That's where I stand. In addition to, it looks bad, because I have people that come to me and say, how come Centerville didn't go out to bid on this? My company wanted to bid and you didn't bid it out. I get that from people. And so having one more thing where, oh, Centerville had already picked somebody and we didn't go out to bid is just one more thing where I'm going to have to deal with people. So I'm frustrated. I would rather have other options and look at other options, or have a guarantee that I can sit down and say, no, this isn't okay, and I'm going to veto it. I want something different than what I saw on Tuesday, and I want it a lot different.
So
let me understand. What you want is a lot different than what the focus group of 125 people who met for 6 weeks, and you as an individual want to be able to veto the whole project.
No, I don't want to veto the whole project, but I do want some things listened to that haven't been listened to.
Well, I've only heard a specific list of your concerns the one time you brought them up, and I was really glad to finally hear the specific list, and I do feel like those got very legitimately and specifically addressed.
Okay, well, the list has grown as I went to the tour on Tuesday, so I'd rather not do it on YouTube right now at 10:30 when I'm tired and grouchy, because I don't want to.
But those kind of specifics can still continue to get addressed in the final plan, which we need the landscape architect for. And so I don't think it's the landscape architect that's faulty. I think that you are having an issue with the process, and that will still be part of the process, is to have that voice heard in deciding the final.
My voice was used when part of the voice of the focus group was not listened to, and the focus group member came to me and said, these are the issues that are not being listened to. Will you do something about it? So it's not just me. there are some issues, and maybe they can be easily resolved. Maybe they can. But I'm not seeing it being easily resolved yet, and I want to have a guarantee of that, or
I can never give you a guarantee that one person that comes to you with an issue is going to have all of their issues resolved.
No, but I
when
want
we
them
have
heard.
a voting process that says, here is what the majority of the people in this vote focus group want. And I guarantee you, there's 2 or 3 people in there that didn't get everything they wanted, and they will never get it.
Oh, well, I'm not asking that everything be resolved to everybody's happy about it. But I don't feel like it's being heard. I want some things to be heard instead of just, oh, really? With big, wide eyes and then no response about it. I'd like some discussion about some issues that I've run into because I take my children to parks. And I've got young children, and I've come up with some issues that my children ran into at another park and that I don't want to see replicated in our park because I want it to be awesome.
And these are legitimate concerns, and your concern about the process is a legitimate concern. I just honestly do not see how your concerns are tied specifically to what landscape architect. It's about the process, not about which landscape architect. No.
Okay, so let's find a way for the process is going to listen because it hasn't so far.
I'm under some time constraints, and so I would just appreciate if, at the very least, we could respond to the motion that I've put on the table.
Yeah, I was going to ask if we can get a ruling on the motion.
Will you restate that motion?
The motion is to direct staff, as recommended in the staff report, to move forward negotiating with MGB plus A, and then in hopefully 2 weeks' time, come back with negotiated price and also a more clear confirmation that we are following procurement policy.
Local, state, and federal.
Local,
Right.
state,
What's
and
all
federal.
included in the $100,000 cap?
Exactly.
What can you count, what doesn't count?
But that very clearly written out for us in that staff report along with the numbers. That's the motion.
So we have a motion, we have a second? No second on the motion?
Okay, I was trying to get a word in edgewise and couldn't.
I'm sorry, because I have to excuse myself. I'm so sorry. I need to go.
Okay. I have some issues that I would like to go into closed meeting over because I'm not comfortable laying them out on YouTube. And I talked to Lisa about them while we were talking. I believe they qualify for the provisions under state law. Does it have to happen tonight? No, it doesn't have to happen tonight. It has to happen before I'm going to agree with what we're talking about.
So let me make an alternate motion. I hear what Tammy said in her motion, and I want to reverse it. I want to table this until I have the federal, state, and city guidelines, because I'm the other way's backwards. So I want to table it until next meeting with the expectation that staff will be able to return with the read from Lisa on the federal and state guidelines and interpreted by staff members as appropriate to their duties. That's my motion.
That's not going to solve my problem.
It's not going to solve your problem, but it's at least going to make me feel like I'm in the right order. I've got all my procurement solved, and then I can move forward.
I guess I could second that. It doesn't resolve my issue either, but I can see that that's a good order of things.
At least the order of operations will be correct for me. The other issues, whatever they are, I'm not sure that
But
that's
should we go into the
resolvable.
closed meeting and then come back to do that? So that both you and Bill's issues are resolved?
Does it affect this motion?
Well, we have a motion, a second, that we have to vote on, right?
Okay.
So does everybody recall what the motion was?
You might end up in a tiebreaker. This could be the moment.
So restate the motion. I want everybody to be aware of it.
The motion is that we direct staff to obtain the federal, state, and guidelines for the use of the procurement, whether it's below 100,000 or over, that we have the read from the city attorney, city manager, and the parks director, so that we are in compliance with federal and state law for the usage of these funds. The expectation that's coming back to us at this next council meeting to render a decision, selection, and in compliance.
Okay, so we had a motion, a second. Thanks for restating the motion. Let's start with Councilwoman Ivy.
Aye.
Aye.
Nay.
Nay.
Nay. So motion fails 3-2. So what is there another motion to?
I'd like to go into closed meeting to talk about what my concerns are.
But, and just to state my discussion, there are particular reasons under state law that you can go into a closed meeting. So those are either to discuss the character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual, discuss pending or reasonably imminent litigation. Just chime in, Bill, when I hit one.
You did.
Okay.
First one.
Okay. Or you can also, if you need to obtain legal advice from your attorney, we can go into closed session for that.
I think that
Or the sale or exchange of real property, but we're not really doing any of those, so.
Bill, I'll second your motion.
And that
Motion
one
to
you-
go.
You do need a 2/3 vote to go into closed session.
okay.
Need 2/3 vote to go into closed session?
Yes.
Okay. So we have a motion to go in closed second, and a second.
Aye.
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 Motion passes 4-0. It's 2/3, right? My bad.
So that you know, this
They made it
has nothing
easy.
to do with you.